Christ himself brings people to him. But a scientific argument properly used can break that resistance so that a person can listen to Christ.
Now, we've got about 7 minutes left here. Let's shift back to your perspective as a pure scientist. The argument from design. You said in an earlier interview with me that this argument from design, or this view that there is a designer, there must be a designer. Even before you became a believer, you had this sense there was a designer. Yeah. There had to be someone who made the rules.
Right.
Is that becoming an increasingly compelling argument in the scientific community?
I should think so, because more and more people are now willing to accept that looking for design means science after all. That's one of the main arguments that atheists use. Intelligent design is no science, because if you look for design, that's not science. If that is so, then it means that the SETI program, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is not scientific either, because what are they looking for? Design and signals coming from space. Right, so is it science or is it not? Of course it is science. Of course intelligent design has finally broken some mental barriers. If you look into the history of science in the 20th century, from the 1950s, when humans had the attitude that in a few years they're going to know everything and they're going to be the masters of the universe, through the 60s and turmoils with the students, the first challenge from the other side, and in the 70s and 80s when serious doubts started to be raised from within the scientific community, and here we are now, the 21st century, having humans, scientists, academics, truly accepting that there are problems in here. And let's face them, rather than just eliminate them based on ideology.
Problems in the evolutionary worldview.
Precisely. There's not problems with science per se, problems with the evolutionary worldview. The idea, which evolutionary is just a tool, it's an instrument. It is naturalism that is the true philosophy behind it.
Right.
The idea, and that's the definition of science today, although nobody really cares to take this to court. Science is, according to most people, interpreting things by natural ways.
What would be an example of an emerging flaw or difficulty in the evolutionary perspective?
Well, it's been there for a long time, and it's becoming even more obvious now, the fact that they can't explain how life started naturally. And the fact that you have a Nobel Prize winner like Francis Crick for the discovery of the structure of the DNA, accepting or moving to the panspermia concept, saying therefore that there were not good enough conditions on Earth for life to emerge naturally, so it's been seeded here by some extraterrestrials from much better conditions of evolution in there. You really understand that this is the major problem.
Like life has been seeded by aliens?
Exactly, that's what Francis Crick believes.
Is this also what Dawkins?
No, well, it's an admission of Dawkins is actually at the very end of Expelled, when Ben Stein says, okay, and what if you're wrong, and actually it turns out, that there is design. Well, actually there is design, he says, but if there's design, it's not from God, it's from aliens.
Aliens.
A cheap escape. We have a saying, actually, in my native country, is dropping the dead cat into the neighbor's driveway.
So the posture that one should take as a believer is not that of a militant, I'm going to ram this down your throat, I'm going to argue you into faith posture. Mm-hmm. What you're saying is that we all deal from a paradigm, as you call it, of assumptions.
Yes.
I guess the question then is, in the remaining time we have here, is it a crapshoot? How do we know that one set of assumptions is better than the other?
Well, let's put it very simply. Let's listen to a guy who was way smarter than I am, Blaise Pascal. Redefining his famous wager in just simpler terms. He said this: if you lived if you lived a Christian's life and there is no God, you haven't lost anything. But if you lived a non-Christian's life and there is a God, you lost everything. So you're in a position of choosing between two paradigms. If you don't really want to believe in eternity, it's your choice, of course. You still can believe in punishment, right? So choosing a life in which there's no responsibility, which is the atheistic way, or choosing a life in which there is a responsibility, but it's a double responsibility, in the sense that I'm responsible for my actions towards, to God, but that God is also responsible for the promise He made me. So He's going to take care of me if I abide by His rules. I believe that the second set of assumptions is much better. If I assume that somebody made me, somebody created me, I also assume that my final destiny is in His hands rather than mine. And that's a no-brainer. My hands are not capable enough to ensure eternity.
Scripture says nobody comes except the Father draws him. Where does the supernatural ingredient enter into Emil Silvestru's life?
Well,
because you're very rational, you're very logical, you're very well educated.
There have been so many moments in my life when rationality and logic have been defeated. Like we had no food, and food was provided to us literally miraculously. A big frozen chicken appearing on the 3rd floor where we used to live, on a balcony out of nowhere. Actually, it was a neighbor who just moved in, and he just decided to put this chicken, and we were starving, we had no food.
This was during the communist era in
Exactly.
Romania.
Or not having money to pay our the monthly expenses, the utilities, right? And then that's 10 o'clock in the evening, and my wife optimistically praying, God, I know you're going to solve this. And come on, get serious. I mean, it's 10 o'clock in the evening, and 8 o'clock in the morning I have to pay. Then somebody rings at the door and brings an envelope, which was sent to us 3 months before. They only brought it then. And inside the envelope was exactly the sum that we had to pay next day. And on and on and on. So, I mean, once it's a coincidence, twice is what? It's so obvious. That's the supernatural element. It's not in the sense that miraculously money materialized or food materialized, but God used people providing for us when we really needed those things. You know, I mean, He's not that much of a... He's got a great sense of humor, I know that. And that's one of the things that convinced me that He existed. But other than that, it's just that when He's doing these things consistently in our lives, now our lives, my wife and I have been throughout all our life together just exactly like that. You know, so of course there's the supernatural element. As a scientist, I'm happy to be able to say, I can't explain this because this is God's miracle. I'm not ashamed to say that. I'm actually very proud. You know, and I believe that, as a Romanian poet once says, we shouldn't try to crush the aura of mysteries of the world. God has set some things aside that we'll never be able to understand, but that's fine. That's what really makes us love Him and respect Him. If we explained everything, who are we?
Yeah. That's a good point to end the interview. Dr. Emil Silvestru, thank you for coming our way. Terrific guest. We've had a great series of interviews with you. All the best in your work. Creation.com is the website, friends. Check it out.